Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you. Yang berbahagia General Tan Sri Datuk Sri Haji Afandi bin Buang RMAF, the Chief of Defence Force Malaysia. Yang berbahagia General Tan Sri Datuk Sri Muhammad Asghar Khan bin Goriman Khan RMAF, the Chief of Royal Malaysian Air Force. Yang berbahagia Mrs. Miriam Fisher, Director of KAS Malaysia. Yang berusaha Dr. Anis bin Mahmud, Deputy Secretary General. Yang berbahagia Mr. Noor Hisham bin Rosli, Chief Executive of MiDAS, senior officials, honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera. First of all, on behalf of the organizer, we would like to take this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to the Intercontinental Hotel Kuala Lumpur for the MiDAS-KAS Conference 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, this is once a year scholarly conference with bilateral collaboration between MiDAS and Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, or known as KAS, from Germany. The theme for today's conference is Regional Terrorism Challenges and Counter-Violent Extremism Perspective. We hope that the exciting session we have lined up for you will be fruitful and engaging. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to bless this auspicious occasion, we would like to call upon Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad Nizar Zahrin to lead the dua.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, all praises are due to Almighty Allah, the cherisher and sustainer of the world. Grant us peace and tranquility, safety, wisdom and guidance to perform all that you expect out of us. Peace and mercy of Allah be showered upon us, upon the last prophet of God, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma ya Allah, on this glorious afternoon, we seek your grace and mercy for this MiDAS-KAS Conference 2022. As your humble servants, we thank you for all the blessings and may you guide us all towards our daily deeds. Allahumma ya Allah, we pray and ask your blessings to make this conference a success. We realize that without your grace and mercy, all our endeavors would be null and to no avail. We seek your guidance to facilitate our efforts and protect us from any inconvenience throughout this period. Allahumma ya Allah, we also pray that you will give us strength and wisdom so we will be able to upgrade our expertise, professionalism, and strengthen our cohesion. Show us the right path, dispel anxiety, and remove hatred out of our hearts, and promote among us a sense of cooperation and sincerity, so we will have global goodwill and harmony. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana haza jam'an marhuma wa tafarruqana min ba'dihi tafarruqan ma'suma. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azaban nar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now to formally kick off our event this afternoon, it is my pleasure to invite Yang Berbahagia Mrs. Miriam Fisher, Director of KAS Malaysia, to deliver her opening remarks.
Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to welcome all of you here today for our MiDAS-KAS conference this year. We've chosen the title Regional Terrorism Challenges and Counter-Violent Extremism Perspectives. It is indeed a pleasure, and it is the first time in 3 years that we have finally been able to meet again in person and to have our MiDAS-KAS conference live and in person again. Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, or KAS, is a German non-profit, non-government think tank with offices in more than 120 countries abroad. Work that we do includes the promotion of democracy, multilateralism, sustainable economic development, and innovation, as well as security. We support regional and international security dialogues, and to just name an example, KAS has just organized a counter-terrorism and security cooperation event at the World Summit on Counter-Terrorism just 2 weeks ago. So this highlights the relevance of the topic that we have chosen today. The current terrorist and extremist challenges are diverse, they are complex, and they are unpredictable threats that our authorities have to deal with. We all witness the danger of increased hatred all around the globe, hatred that is spreading above all on the internet and on social media. We all witness various forms of extremism and nationalism that are threatening our democracies worldwide. And we all witness a shifting of global terror hotspots in our interconnected world. And we all know that the threats from Al-Qaeda are far from eliminated. We all witness international right-wing terrorism becoming a center stage phenomenon, and it will certainly be a central task for us in the coming years. And because of all these challenges, it is more important than ever that we increase and improve our cooperation in security policy and in counter-terrorism. We need an all-of-society approach for building resilience, and just as importantly, we need to strengthen multilateralism. Germany and the European Union are highly committed to an even better cooperation in the counter-terrorism sector, and that is why we've all come here together, because we share that belief. Thank you to our fantastic panel of speakers. We are very looking forward to your valuable contributions. Some of you have even traveled specifically to KL to be here with us today. Thank you. And then really thank you to Nadia, our dear moderator, who's actually become almost like a brand of the MiDAS-KAS conferences, and it's wonderful to finally meet you in person, Nadia. Thank you for guiding us through the day. And of course, thank you to MiDAS for the successful cooperation of all these years and for always being open to putting together conferences on such important topics. And last but not least, thank you to all of you. Thank you to our audience who is here in the room and who are joining us online. And I really want to ask you to ask questions, please comment, please engage. We're finally able to be in the same room again. Please let us hear what you think, share your thoughts and questions. And with that, I just wish us all a very interesting discussion today and a fruitful event. Thank you very much. Terima kasih.
Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Nur Hisham bin Rosli, Chief Executive of MiDAS, for his welcoming remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berbahagia General Tan Sri Datuk Sri Haji Effendi bin Buang, RMAF, Chief of Defence Force Malaysia. Yang berbahagia General Tan Sri Datuk Sri Muhammad Azgar Han bin Goriman Han, RMAF, Chief of Royal Malaysian Air Force. Yang berusaha Dr. Anis bin Mahmud, Deputy Secretary General Management for Ministry of Defence Malaysia. Mrs. Miriam Fisher, Director of KAS Malaysia, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good afternoon. I wish everyone a warm welcome to the latest edition of the MiDAS-KAS conference. The collaboration between MiDAS and KAS began in 2014. Our partnership grew strong every year, and since 2019, we never failed to organize an annual conference. Our conference discusses topics concerning a lot of parties and benefited a lot of participants. On that note, I wish to express our heartfelt gratitude again to Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, or KAS, for their ardent support for MiDAS over the years. In the past MiDAS-KAS conference, we discussed the importance of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, issues of the COVID-19 pandemic, the challenges of maritime security, and this year we discussed another important topic which never been foreign to us, to be honest. The challenges brought forward by terrorism and violent terrorism always require us to be ready physically or mentally. We desire new ideas and approaches so that we are always ahead of any possible threats from terrorists and extremists. Amidst the ongoing issue of COVID-19, economic recovery, the war in Ukraine, tensions in the Taiwan Strait, AUKUS, and great power competition in the South China Sea, we just cannot close one eye on the issue of terrorism. If we neglect it, it is always a possibility that terrorism may catch us by surprise. MiDAS is always on the look for new and young scholars. The right recipe for discussion is mixing fresh ideas from the young researchers with the insights and experience of earlier scholars. Our conference brought together speakers of old and new friends, senior and junior scholars, and I am proud that we have more women speakers than men this time. That is to meet the UN requirement, so to speak. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, this event would not be possible without the cooperation from KAS and the blessing from the ministry, especially from our minister himself, Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Hishamuddin bin Tun Hussein. We are honored that he will share his thoughts in his keynote address that soon be delivered by the Yang Berbahagia General Tan Sri Datuk Sri Haji Effendi bin Buang, the Chief Defence Forces. Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri, we are indeed honored and delighted to have you with us this afternoon. For everyone's information, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri is a staunch supporter and a good friend of MiDAS. I therefore, please allow me this honor to invite Yang Berbahagia General Tan Sri to deliver the keynote address. Tan Sri, silakan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berbahagia Jeneral Tan Sri Datuk Seri Muhammad Azgar Khan bin Goriman Khan, the Chief of Air Force, Yang Busher Dr. Anis bin Mahmud, Deputy Secretary General of Management, Yang berbahagia Mrs. Miriam Fisher, the Director of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Yeah. Susah cakap Jerman ni. I did it right? Yang berbahagia Mr. Noor Hisham Rosli, Acting Chief Executive, Malaysia Institute of Defence and Securities. Distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon. Before I begin, allow me to first convey the warm regards of Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Hishamuddin Tun Hussein, the Senior Minister of Defence Malaysia, and also his deepest apologies as he is unable to make the event today due to prior commitment. Nevertheless, he sent his best wishes and would like to express appreciation to the Malaysian Institute of Defence and Security and KAS for inviting him to deliver the keynote address in his stead. The Malaysian Armed Forces and Ministry of Defence welcome the effort of the co-organizers to encourage discussion among the various background of presenters and participants. We are confident the insight and perhaps knowledge captured in this event today will affect our day-to-day work and our policy on counter-terrorism and countering violent extremism. In September, we celebrated two important events which fall on the same day, Hari Malaysia and Malaysian Armed Forces Day. This month also marked the 21st anniversary of the 9/11 attack. Although Malaysia was not the target, the consequences of the attack reached our nation and the region. Much has changed in the last 21 years, especially concerning terrorism. Many lessons can be learned. Nonetheless, we realize that terrorism continues to evolve, which challenges us. When Osama bin Laden was killed in 2011, terrorism did not end. We saw the rise of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and the Daesh. It took the world several years to confront it, and although the threat has lessened, we cannot close the chapter of Daesh yet. Daesh online radicalisation continue to take place. Terrorists and extremists continue to spread their narrative on social media, perhaps even as we speak. Interestingly, not even COVID-19 could stop the extremists from spreading their radical propaganda. While we are still dealing with Daesh, trends of far-right extremism are on the rise. Even though such a threat has yet to reach our region, we need to prepare for such possibilities. The case in point is that terrorism or extremism does not sleep. It will continue to fester in the background as we, the peace-loving people, must remain constantly vigilant. This brings me to my next point, maintaining vigilance. I wish to draw everyone's attention to the news that an Abu Sayyaf group cell went unnoticed in Beaufort, Sabah for more than a decade. It is shocking news which unfortunately happened while we were on guard. Such a piece of information makes us wonder how it went unnoticed. How did they slip under our radar? Why did we take so long to identify such a situation? What did we do wrong? I don't have the best answer with me. Our mantra in counter-terrorism and extremism is the whole of society approach dealing with this threat. It also shows that in counter-terrorism, the government needs the public to be the eyes and ears for the government. We need the public to report to the authorities on any suspicious activities. Attaining the awareness of the public requires educating the public on what we mean by suspicious activities. This is where the government agencies need to work hand in hand with the public. Counter-terrorism is never easy, but with collective effort, we can be more proficient. Ladies and gentlemen, in the past 2 years, we were bogged down with COVID-19 and the great power competition. While these two issues still warrant our serious attention, we cannot afford to neglect the threat of terrorism and extremism. I wish to inform everyone that Malaysia, through the Ministry of Defence, is improving and renewing its bilateral ties with neighboring countries. And among the agenda of this bilateral cooperation is strengthening counter-terrorism, mainly safeguarding our borders from intrusion of possible terror groups. While the Ministry of Defence and the Malaysian Armed Forces remain watchful and cautious, our role in counter-terrorism is pretty much limited. mostly confined to hard approaches or anti-terrorism measures. It is evident that in counter-terrorism, all ministries and agencies play an important role. It is not just a burden for the Royal Malaysian Police and the Ministry of Home Affairs. The responsibility should be shouldered by everyone. Each agency plays the specific role and specialize in certain area, hence the whole of government approach. I am delighted to note that this conference gathers speakers from various backgrounds, including practitioners, academicians, and analysts. The participants too also represent various ministries, agencies, universities, and NGOs. And our speaker and participants are not only from this ballroom, but also participating with us online. It showcased the counter-terrorism and extremism spirit that we wanted. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier in my speech, I mentioned that terrorism never sleeps. Therefore, the action we will take, the measure we plan, and the challenges we foresee should be not just for tomorrow. We should be prepared for what may happen a decade from now. Just because the probability of particular terrorism and extremism threat does not occur today or tomorrow, it does not mean it will not happen 10 years from now. It is therefore of utmost importance to stay proactive in many senses, including such a discourse like this. I am aware that nobody can predict the future. Nonetheless, specific preparation must be done at present. Prevention and preparation from all sorts of angles, be it emergency response, the battle of ideologies, and the need to be a step ahead of those who wish to see chaos, calamity, and destruction in our societies. I urge everyone to come up with new ideas, fresh innovation, and novel pearls of wisdom, because it is likely that we will not see the last of terrorism in our lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I wish to thank the co-organizers for inviting me to share my thought. I am aware that the conference schedule is packed. I do not wish to take more of your time. I wish everyone a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri, for the keynote address. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue our event with the first session entitled Terrorism and Counter-Terrorism Regional Update. Therefore, I would like to invite Ms. Nadia Azmi, our moderator for today, to be on stage. Ms. Nadia Azmi is a public relations practitioner and media relations specialist, news anchor for Midnight News in TV3, Nightline, and Visual. Ladies and gentlemen, our speakers for this session are Ms. Munira Mustafa, founder and executive director, Chester Group. Major Nur Izani Aini, Defense Intelligence Staff Organization, Malaysian Armed Force. And Associate Professor Dr. Ramli bin Dollah, University of Malaysia, Sabah. Now I hand over the session to our moderator, Ms. Nadia Azmi. Thank you.
Thank you, Puan Sharmila. Before we start, a very good afternoon. Assalamualaikum to our dignitaries, Tan Sri, and also Mrs. Miriam, and also Encik Nur Hisham. Thank you again for this opportunity to be part of the MiDAS-KAS conference. This is the third installation that I'm involved with you, and I'm happy for this opportunity. And it's great that we are able to gather here this time in person. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now for this first session, I would like to say that lockdowns caused by the COVID-19 pandemic have sparked online radicalization, globally. Thus, trends of terrorism and counter-terrorism have changed, particularly in Southeast Asia. So in this first session, we will discuss the effect of the pandemic toward terrorism and counter-terrorism activities and patterns, and how the scenario has shifted in the region. We have three esteemed speakers for this session. We have Ms. Munira over here, and the other two speakers will be joining online via Zoom, as we are in a hybrid mode today. So we're glad that we have our audience joining from all over the world, from Europe and also from Germany. We're glad to be able to have them join us today as well. I'd also like to remind the audience members that we will have a Q&A session towards the end. We will open up the floor for questions, so do have your questions jotted down and ready. You can see that we have 3 microphones up front, so when it's the Q&A session, you may proceed to the microphone that's closest to you and to have your question asked to our speakers. All right. For those joining online, you may also submit your questions in the Zoom chat box, and you can do that at any time throughout the presentations. All right. Now, our first speaker is Ms. Munira Mustafa. A little bit about her. She is the founder and executive director of Chasea Group, a research and analytical consulting firm specializing in security challenges. Since 2014, Munira has worked as a security and intelligence practitioner in the corporate, public, and military sectors of the security industry. Her research on terrorism and extremism, militant group behavior, and cyber warfare has also appeared in several publications, including the NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence and Global Network on Extremism and Technology. Her presentation today will uncover the state of terrorism and violent extremism in Southeast Asia in recent years. With that, over to you, Ms. Munira.
It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'll try to keep to the time. Oh, thanks. So I'm just going to make sure that it's running. Oh, am I pointing there? I'm pointing everywhere. It's not. No? Okay. Okay, so now it's working. Sorry about that. So I can't really see it here, so I'm just going to keep glancing over there. So the title of my presentation today will be Terrorism and Violent Extremism in Southeast Asia in Recent Years. So these will be the syllabus that we'll be covering today. I'll just be doing a brief explanation on the problem statement, and then I'm going to provide the net assessment of what's been happening, and then I'll provide a terrain analysis by deep diving into the landscape to understand what's changed, risks and challenges. And I'm going to talk a bit about how we've been responding across the region, not just Malaysia, so I'll be discussing about other countries as well. And I'll be touching on a bit on the emerging threats, and followed by conclusion on what we've learned and what are the implications. So here's the big question that everyone's been freaking out since the Taliban returned. Here, has extremism increased since Taliban's return to power? Now, this is a multi-layered question, and their return to power in August 2021 has rekindled fears that its fanatical supporters throughout Southeast Asia may have revived terrorist ambitions. And you'll be seeing a lot of articles last year being generated saying that, oh, extremism is going to increase in Southeast Asia. This is, there's going to be a second front, blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to pop that balloon because I'm going to show this to you. I'm a bit of a quant person. I do empirical analysis. So this, using data collected from open source by the Global Terrorism Database, oops, here we go. We're going to try and understand the trends concerning terrorism-related incidents within the region. Now, we can see that there is a significant dip after the fall of the caliphate in 2017. And I'm going to discuss the factors that attribute to the decline in these incidents. Now, we're going to look at the timeline of what's been happening. Granted, we did see an uptick in self-initiated attacks approach, particularly between 2016 to 2019, which was fueled by Islamic State's vow to establish a caliphate. Now, following the so-called caliphate's 2017 demise in Syria, we could see that, a lot of the commentators, pundits, were anticipating that Islamic State would seek to resurrect its Southeast Asia second front. And there was a lot of panic about this. So countries including Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines were disproportionately affected by the Islamic State networks. owing to the group's decentralized approach built around propaganda narratives that led to the so-called self-radicalization phenomenon, a term that I myself have a lot of issues with. And this has inspired acts of terrorism and the emergence of foreign terrorist fighters. Now let's look at the heat map. So these are data quantified over the past 5 to 7 years, and it shows you the concentration of the events across the region. Now, I'm going to explain a bit. So religious extremism appears to be the primary driver for militant movements in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, well, mostly in the southern Philippines, and you can see the intense concentration in that region. We can see the militant-related incidents here, and is this something that we should worry about? Now, I think it's important to remember that Islamic State is already on the decline. So, and right now it's just struggling against military actions in Iraq and Syria. It's no longer a conventional warfare. It's back to unconventional warfare with weaker power against a smaller group strength. But what we should appreciate is that many of its fighters have decamped to the Islamic State Khorasan province to fight against the Taliban. Now that's a hotspot. Fact is that the February 2022 decapitation strike that killed Islamic State leader Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi, that's a name, in northern Syria dealt a serious decapitation blow to the group's rebuilding narrative. Now, the importance of the surgical strike is that it hits them just as they were rebuilding. So this is very strategic, and it hits them right at a great moment, and their attempts at resurgence. So just like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's death before, it is quite unlikely that al-Qurashi's killing would inspire revenge attacks in South Asia, and I'm going to explain why. Let's look at this map. Now, what we need to recall is that the bitter rivalry between Al-Qaeda and Islamic State Khorasan may have diluted their influence in Southeast Asia, as there's no longer a common goal to galvanize the global ummah. We have to remember that this is now 2022, it's not 1990s, fresh off from the Soviet Afghanistan war. So the links between the local militants and the Afghans are not as strong as before. Also, Islamic State Khorasan province's own ambiguous goals seem focused on expanding its reach and influence in South and Central Asia. So there's no indication that they would attempt to expand or any evidence that they have the resources to facilitate training and build connections here. Now, the group members are mostly from South Asia and Central Asia, and many of them are former Taliban themselves. So here on the slides, I don't know, it's a bit cut off, were notations of the last few significant attacks in the last 5 years. And you could see how there have been strong military actions and counterterrorism policing efforts as the key drivers and responses for weakening militant activities. So let's talk about net assessment and what we can learn from this. So firstly, it's important to contextualize militant movements and terrorism trends in this region. While there remains a prevailing extremist threat in Southeast Asia, the collapse of the Islamic State Caliphate in Iraq and Syria and the re-emergence of the Taliban governments in Afghanistan does not equate to increased likelihood of politically or religiously motivated violence in the region. Policymakers, especially, should refrain from overestimating this threat, because this would only lead to creating hasty, overreaching policies that are counterproductive. Now, I'm going to go over the 3 key countries with known Islamist militancy activities for case study. So I'm going to start off with the Philippines. Now, at the moment, the last major active groups in the Philippines were Maute Group, now defunct, Abu Sayyaf Group, still around, and Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters. The communist insurgency and Islamist militancy represent the primary internal threats to the Philippines, and both are active in Mindanao. Now, in 2021, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, estimated that there were around 3,000 NPA fighters operating nationwide, down from nearly 30,000 fighters at the end of the Marcos regime in the mid-1980s. That's a huge change of numbers. So more than half of these fighters operate in communist strongholds in Eastern Mindanao. So as groups linked for the Islamic State various factions in central and western Mindanao, number between 300 and 500. And this estimate has remained fairly consistent since 2014. So they're not as great as a lot of people thought they were. However, the challenges facing the military right now is that they're more diverse than the previous groups. The Southern Philippines region is host to an array of armed factions, not just violent extremist groups, and this is hampering the rebuilding efforts post-Marawi. So of the various armed militias that proliferate in region, some directly support state actors. Others operate to dispense violence for political clans or players in illicit economies. So these are the factors that we need to account for when we look and assess for threats. Now, translate that to the village or barangay level. The AFP may be first among equals, but they're not alone in exercising legitimate coercion and force in communities, and that's where I'm pointing out the spikes in election-related violence. The pandemic, especially, had presented the government in the Philippines with an unusual advantage, an opportunity to offer militants incentives to disarm and demobilize in exchange for the return to normalcy in their lives. Now, many militant members, including members of ASG, BIFF, who are becoming increasingly demoralized as a result of the territorial defeat, leadership decapitations, loss of bases, stronghold deprivation, they decided to, you know what, I'm just going to give up and I'm going to exchange this for normal life. So let's look at Indonesia next. Now, Jama'ah Islamiyah remains to be the most dangerous terrorist network in Southeast Asia and poses a medium to long-term threat, despite being inactive for several years. They have been very agile in circumventing the pandemic by inventing fictional, non-governmental charity organizations and orphanages and planting charity boxes in shops and mini-markets across Indonesia to get money from people to finance the group's activities. And they've been using this money to support their members' travel to Syria and trade with the Hayat al-Tahrir al-Hisham and paying for legal fees for their members on trial at the court. Now, groups like JAD and MIT, in comparison, they're not as well organized and structured like Jama'ah Islamiyah, and they don't really have the same amount of money. So they can't cope with the external challenges and counterterrorism pressure. Now, MIT, for instance, recently splintered and has been experiencing severe losses. And it's very difficult for them to recuperate and endure without any form of leadership. So there's been more further arrests by Densus 88 since then. And what we can conclude from the cases of Indonesia and Philippines is that upticks in attacks does not necessarily translate to group effectiveness or strength. So it's important to not overestimate the utility of violence because their strikes have been doctrineless. They've not been strategic with the tactics. So they can only function as poor capacity signaling. The only reason why they've been doing those attacks is just to show that they can do it. But that does not necessarily translate to a very good number of members. And this is where counterterrorism pressure could be better improved. Now let's look at Malaysia. Although militancy-related incidents are rare in the country, what we can establish is that Malaysia is a well-known transit point and an established safe haven for terrorist groups. At its peak, the Islamic State managed to bring over 100 Malaysians to join it in Syria since 2013. So when they start to lose territory, they start to switch narratives and persuade their followers to carry out homegrown attacks instead. Now, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about increased radicalization, but I would argue that you can't really measure radicalization. So we can take 2016 Movida bar grenade attack, for instance, which was carried out by local Islamic State operative Muhammad Wandi Muhammad Jadai. Prompted fears that the group was about to ramp up its attacks in Malaysia. But Wandi is not very experienced. He was a noob, and the local pro-IS individuals' poor capabilities, coordination, they can't organize themselves. So the attack at Movida in Puchong, of all places, was not significant, it was not major, and it left no impact. If you ask any regular person, they won't even remember the attack took place. So what's even more important to understand is that the lack of suicide attacks, and people have been talking about this, why hasn't there been any suicide attacks in Malaysia? Not that we want it, but we want to understand why. It cannot and should not be attributed to the absence of foreign fighters. Correlation is not causation. The correct takeaway is that as harmful as ultra-conservative views may be for pluralism, mainstreaming them lessens the necessity for insurrectionary fundamentalist violence in favor of institutionalized fundamentalism. In other words, there's no utility for them to commit suicide in Malaysia because there's no point, basically. So let's look at government counterterrorism responses. Now, following consultations with key government stakeholders and civil society organizations, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines each developed and implemented a national action plan on preventing and countering violent extremism that took a whole-of-government and whole-of-society approaches to combating extremism as part of their extremism responses. Now, increased information sharing agreements, reciprocal cross-border assistance, and sub-regional efforts like the trilateral cooperative arrangement and Our Eyes initiatives can be leveraged for the benefit of democratic government's counterterrorism efforts. But at the local level, we are relying a lot on NPCVE. And there's a lot to take away from this because, again, as I've said, radicalization cannot be measured. So PCVE efforts need to be holistic. It cannot be too focused on correcting religious interpretation. It needs to be directed at improving social fractures. So let's talk about emerging threats. In the context of Maritime Southeast Asia, it's important to recognize that online violent extremism of the region is not a simple dichotomous pitting of Islamists versus the far right against one another, but it's actually a spectrum of ideologies as heterogeneous as the people in the region. Moreover, social networking platforms have been complicit for this sharing and cross-pollination of ideas in so many ways. Firstly, digital companies' concentration on removing content uploaded by Islamist extremists has created a blind spot for far-right hate speech. Tech companies delete Islamist content from the platform as soon as they notice it. But the same cannot be said for incitement or hate speech, especially on the regional scale. And secondly, social media companies hyper-focus on deleting Islamist materials at the expense of ideologically motivated, discriminatory, and extremist content has led to insufficient monitoring and inadequate management of hate speech. And they are independent of national legislation. This is especially true for non-English and regional content and has helped spread harmful ideologies, movements, and behaviors in the region, such as hate speech to encourage violence, partisan messaging to sway voters, discrediting journalists and media, and historical revisionism to promote ethno-nationalist agendas. Now, we can take Myanmar as an example of that because the Mabata themselves legitimizes state-sanctioned violence against the anti-Rohingya as a propaganda and mobilize the clearing operation. So, authoritarian regimes and far-right groups have exploited this social negligence by the social media companies. I can talk a bit about, sorry. Nope. Sorry about that. So, no, it's still not going back. Oh, okay, gotcha. Right, so apart from these emerging threats, we could also look at information warfare. Misinformation, disinformation are driving at fracturing society, fragmenting society. Financial frauds and cyber slavery is also the latest issue that cropped up in data breaches. And why I'm bringing this up, because it should be seen as a national defense issue, because it is going to erode our resilience as a community and at national level. So in conclusion, what we can learn from this presentation is that links are only aspirational. Just because the Taliban came back, just because Islamic State has gone down, it doesn't directly impact us. Maybe just a bit of that have blown their way here. And it doesn't necessarily equate to increased likelihood of politically or religiously motivated violence in the region, because a lot of this is galvanized at the local level. Again, that follows my second point here. It's all local now, not global. Actual management and execution still depends on the abilities and capabilities of local actors. Now, the most important point that we can learn from this is fragile democracies. We need to rebuild ourselves and improve our democratic structures. And we need to maybe issue kinetic violence as a strategy, because, these bad actors are now avoiding actual violence and moving towards a more soft approach of violence, because it's a lot more odious in fracturing society. And again, as I mentioned earlier, non-terrorism threats can also be a NatSec problem too, and sometimes there is a nexus. So because they are driven to weaken social structures, which will weaken our own resilience. So because of this, it is important to emphasize more on policy-based approach rather than technology-based approach. So therefore, it's better if we just revamp some policies and make it a bit more holistic and more layered. And that's it for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Munira. So if you do have any questions, please do keep them first, as we will open up the floor for a Q&A session at the end of the speakers' talks. The pandemic has made the world vulnerable to violent extremism, imposing threats to the country, to the security and safety of a country, including Malaysia. With the advancement of digitalization, the threats have changed due to more sophisticated outreach. Next, we will zoom in on Malaysia's perspectives on terrorism and COVID-19. Our second speaker who will touch on this is Major Nur Izani Aini from the Malaysian Defence Intelligence Organisation, MDIO, of the Malaysian Armed Forces. Her current task involves strategic planning for the Malaysian Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defence. Commissioned into the Malaysian Army in 2004, she has held several posts in the Royal Intelligence Corps and the Army Formation, including the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon. With that, passing the stage over to you, Major.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. Good afternoon, Yang Bahagia Tan Sri, Datuk-Datuk, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all can hear me from there.
Yes, we can, Major.
All right, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to this conference. It is an honor for me today to be here to deliver the presentation. Unfortunately, I am not able to be there physically. I'm so sorry about that. So, let me show my slide. Okay. I hope you all could see my slide now.
All good, Major. Please proceed.
All right. Before I start the presentation, I'd like to introduce myself. As mentioned by the speaker, my name is Major Izani. I'm a mature officer from the Armed Forces and currently serve at MDIO, previously known as DISD. I work as staff officer for counter-violent extremism and radicalisation. Graduated from National Defence University of Malaysia and also alumni for National Defence University of the United States of America. I would also like to highlight that all info given in this presentation does not represent MDIO or MAF policies and stand on terrorism issues. It is purely based on my experiences and as city practitioner. As we know, the evolving nature of terrorism and its ability to adapt made it sustain even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Modern technologies, trans-border movements, and comprehensive religious manipulation have been the core contributing factors to the sustainment. The pandemic has not affected terrorist network operations. Now that many countries have reopened their borders, terrorist organizations seek this opportunity to resume their business. The death of Daesh second chief Abu Ibrahim, as mentioned from Ms. Munira earlier, could not disrupt any Daesh network activities. The legacy persists under the leadership of its new successor. Meanwhile, pro-Daesh groups in Southeast Asia continue to engage in violent acts to maintain the credibility of their narrative and remain relevant. As such, regional countries, including Malaysia, have increased and intensified counter-terrorism efforts to address this issue and eliminate every opportunity that would enable terrorism to expand. In this presentation, I will focus on the following scope. The first, trends during the pandemic. The second, regional countries' response to terrorism. The whole assessment, and finally, overall conclusion. Terrorist organizations continue their activities despite the rising COVID-19 pandemic cases worldwide. The pandemic provides terrorist groups with an opportunity to regroup, plot attack, source fund, and increase recruitment as well. Daesh-affiliated radical group remains active in recruiting and training new members to carry out operations and launch attacks. Following the recent developments, three trends have been found that are prevalent during the pandemic. The first is online radicalisation activity. Terrorist activities have slowed down physically due to COVID-19 but are gaining power silently via online platforms. Since 2020, there has been a spike in Daesh and extremist movements online activities in several Southeast Asian countries, including Malaysia. Such increasing activity is attributed to the movement, restrictions, undermining trust in government or moderate political society groups. Terrorists and extremist groups may exploit the current issue in their respective countries to spread extremist narrative, expand their support base, and recruit new members via cyberspace. Terrorist sympathizers also assist terrorist organizations by sharing powerful narrative to gain more likes and followers. For example, a call for jihad. In January 2022, a Tausug from Basilan identified as Ibn B released messages on Facebook calling for Muslims to take up arms to go against government forces operating in Mindanao, followed by a video of Daesh media link group from the southern Philippines in April 2022 calling on followers to poison non-Muslim and launch bomb attacks. Secondly, to encourage women's participation in terror operations. On 2nd February 2022, an Indonesian female Daesh supporter, Ummu Azam Hurairah, called on Indonesian female jihadists through Telegram message to migrate to Syria, Iraq, and the Philippines to seek martyrdom, which is Shahid. Meanwhile, a Daesh Filipino female supporter known as AILU urged other female followers on Facebook to covertly assist militants. Thirdly, Forum for Terror Discussion. A WhatsApp group named Kabul Chasori was detected comprising 42 mobile numbers believed to be supporters of Daesh from Malaysia, Indonesia, the United Kingdom, and as well the United States. The group discussed and insisted Muslims to migrate or hijrah to the conflict-prone such as in the southern Philippines and Syria, and encouraged lone wolf attacks in their homeland. The next trend. The next trend is terrorism financing. Other than online radicalization, operations terrorist networks have also exploited the pandemic to gain additional profit to terrorist activities. Charities are one of several channels exploited by terrorist groups to solicit financial support, and the donors are local sympathizers, diaspora communities overseas, and wealthy individuals. Terrorist organizations can divert the funds to provide logistical support, recruiting activity, or otherwise in order to support their operations. For example, groups like Jemaah Ansharud Daulah and Jemaah Islamiyah have actively collected funds through thousands of charity boxes nationwide. Besides this, funds are also collected through social media, particularly among Daesh sympathizers. Final trend is regroup and regain strength. Terrorist groups in the region may have suspended combat activities and maintain a low profile throughout the pandemic in order to reorganize and or restore strength. For instance, terrorist groups in Indonesia have been engaging of Idat Askari or jihad preparation activities that includes physical training, martial arts, fundraising, weapons procurement, and recruitment. Meanwhile, local terrorist groups in the southern Philippines, particularly Daulah Islamiyah groups, have prioritized recruitment. These efforts implied that extremism would remain in the region and terrorist networks would do anything to survive and re-emerge stronger. Next scope is the regional countries' response to terrorism. Terrorism in Southeast Asia has been on the decline. Despite the ongoing of terrorist activities, notably terrorist media operation and financial support since 2020, there has been no record of big-scale attack occurred in the region so far. The law enforcement has significantly degraded terrorist networks' activities with the killing of terrorist high-profile members, notably their leaders and commanders. The ongoing pressure from the military operations, such as in the southern Philippines and Indonesia, has also limited the presence of foreign terrorist fighters in their respective countries. COVID-19 travel restrictions also appeared to have hampered the movement of terrorists in the region. Next scope is the regional countries' response to terrorism. Terrorism in Southeast Asia has been on, Other significant events that shows how successful regional countries on the challenge against terrorism are, first, in the Philippines. The armed forces of the Philippines continues to eliminate the local terrorist groups, particularly Abu Sayyaf Group, Maute Group, and Bangsa Moro Islamic Freedom Fighters BIF. During 2020 and 2021, more than 370 Abu Sayyaf members and 400 BIF members surrendered to the AFP. The surrender is a result of the successful implementation of the Focused Military Operation or FMO, as well as the strictly implementation of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 in the Philippines. The Preventing Countering Violent Extremism PCVE program as well, also part of the local community efforts to persuade terrorists and their supporters to reintegrate into society. As for Indonesia, the implementation of the Indonesia Counter-Terrorism law since 2018 has gradually crippled terrorist networks such as Neo Jemaah Islamiyah, Mujahidin Indonesia Timur MIT, and JAD Group. In 2021, there were 370 arrests on suspected terrorists and their supporters nationwide, where this number is higher than the 2020 arrests. Besides the effectiveness of counter-terrorism law in arresting suspected terrorists, local authority emphasize on preventative programs to prevent radicalization. The enforcement of Op Madagoraya in Sulawesi has killed dozens of MIT members, which reduced the strength to one member. For Singapore, the Singapore continues to play its part in the fight against terrorism financing, particularly among foreign workers in the Republic. In February 2022, a Bangladeshi construction worker, Ahmad Faizal in Singapore, who donated to Syrian militant group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTH, was jailed for 2 years and 8 months. In April this year, a Singaporean identified as Rajif Lal Madan was arrested for planning to undertake armed violence in the conflict zones. This example illustrates that Singapore will take firm action against anyone who supports, promotes, and undertakes armed violence. And for Malaysia, at present, the threat of terrorism in the country is moderate, with the likelihood of an attack imminent. To date, more than 550 individuals have been arrested, consisting of locals and foreigners for allegedly committing various terrorist activities. The success of these counter-terrorism efforts has driven Daesh Malaysia cells further into the ground, thus limiting their connectivity with the hub in Syria. The fall of the caliphate is also seeing a decline amongst the local adherents. The pandemic-driven movement restrictions that hamper interstate and international movement also flattened the curve of terrorism in Malaysia. The current Malaysian approach in combating terrorism shifted from the hard approach to soft approach, where previously was heavy on preemptive strategy, but now it is primarily preventive. The difference between these strategies is we are seeing lesser people getting arrested. For Malaysian Armed Forces, MDIO, through its responsible task force Prisawira, which is my workplace, has been conducting awareness programs in the aspect of preventing countering violent extremism to all the Malaysian Armed Forces personnel to counter Daesh propaganda within the organization. Although the respective countries in the region have successfully thwarted terror plots and dismantled terrorist cells, however, there are several challenges that may concern us after this. Here are the assessment. First, with the opening of countries' borders, transmigration and cross-border terrorist activities and expected to resume its business. The decline in terrorism-related incidents during pandemic is because of the restriction imposed to contain the virus. The pandemic is testing terrorist group resilience, and their resilience is dependent on their resources, organization capacity, and experience. Terrorist groups will continue in recruiting, solving narrative, and planning attacks. Therefore, terrorist media operation and funding are the main driving force to initiate the modus operandi. Modified strategies for violent attacks, from using women, spouse, youth, to children, violent extremists and terrorist groups will plot various tactics to evade detection, as well as utilizing lone warfare attack that is hardly to monitor. Increased recruitment online. We witness a significant increase in online activities notably on social media by extremists and terrorist media operation based on the current trends. This is the biggest challenge faced by the regional countries to control the flow of terrorist narrative online. Daesh Expansion East Africa may prompt Southeast Asian Muslims to join the struggle. On 15 June 2022, the Islamic State West Africa province ISWAP, the Daesh affiliate in northeastern Nigeria, released a 39-minute propaganda video titled "A Book That Guides and a Sword That Helps," to call Muslims around the world to undertake migration to Africa to build up a new base of operation. Threats posed by the foreign terrorist fighters and returnees itself from the conflict zones. The migration of FTF has been a primary concern for the authorities. FTS and returnees should be closely monitored as they have been battle-hardened and well experienced, especially returnees from Syria and Iraq. Come to my conclusion. Countries are beginning to cope and live with the COVID-19 pandemic. Extremist movements and terrorist networks are also undoubtedly seeking new opportunities to see what this year has in store. Due to the changing trends of extremism and terrorism, the efforts to deal with these two aspects need to be explored and updated to keep pace with the changes. In Southeast Asia, the risk of terrorism remains moderate due to the ongoing counter-terrorism campaign and PCVE efforts, which have been taken to another level. Enforcement agencies in the region are doing their part to curtail the rise and the spread of terrorism. Asian members continue the commitment in enhancing intelligence capacity and hardening border security to mitigate the risk of terrorist activities in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's the end of my presentation today. I would like to end it with this quote by a Pakistani girl who'd been shot by Taliban. I could not agree more that people need to be educated, give awareness, as mentioned also in the minister keynotes. Education and awareness are vital for us. So we all believe that by winning the hearts and minds are the key to counter the root causes of terrorism. With that, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Major. I think it was very interesting to see the trends, the terrorism trends during the pandemic, because there have been perceptions or maybe even misconceptions on this. So it's interesting to see that list. Thank you again, Major. Our third speaker is Associate Professor Dr. Ramli Dola from the International Relations Program, Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at University Malaysia Sabah. His expertise covers security studies, border studies, Sabah security, and East Asia peace and security. He has also authored and co-authored several books, including Isu Keselamatan Persempadanan Negeri Sabah dan Tuntutan Kepulauan Spratly. Today, joining virtually via Zoom on the regional crime terrorism nexus, he will focus on the case of Sabah and Sulu Celebes Sea. With that, I'd like to pass over the mic to Dr. Ramli. Dr. Ramli, I think you are on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. First of all, I would like to thank for the organizer for inviting us to the MiDAS-KAS Conference 2020 on Challenges of Terrorism and Violent Extremism in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. Also, thanks to my colleague, Dr. Hafiza Din, who are not able to attend to the conference for preparing the slides. Yeah. Distinguished guests, Datuk-Datuk, Tuan-Tuan, Puan-Puan, ladies and gentlemen, and all participants. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. Okay, this afternoon I will be presenting something in which I believe that most of you are familiar with. Yeah, our title is a Regional Crime Terrorism Nexus in Sabah and the Greater Sulu Celebes Sea, a threat assessment. Yeah. However, before I proceed with the presentation, let me first define what we meant by regional crime terrorism nexus and link its Sabah context as stated in our title. Yeah, basically, we define regional crime terrorism nexus as a loose varieties of external non-state actors, either cells, groups, or individuals that have been posing a security threat. It is worth noting that in the context of Sabah, all of these external non-state actors do not originally come from Sabah, but rather from neighboring countries that have been exploiting, point out vulnerabilities, including ethno-linguistic and kinship type that I will discuss later in this presentation, to immerse themselves in Sabah. It is a very crucial to highlight as domestically, yeah, Sabah itself does not show any rise of radical or non-violence by the non-state actors. Moreover, based on the global terrorism database, there is no terrorist or violent activist that can be associated with any local groups. Therefore, we conclude that all of these existing security threat came out from outside. Yeah. Okay. in order to understand the issue, we pose two questions and three hypotheses. Our first question, what are the factors of vulnerabilities in Sabah that might have been exploited by various elements of non-state actors? Second question, can we classify different non-state actors that have been deemed as a security threat to Sabah? And we also provide three hypotheses in order for us to understand types of threat of regional crime terrorism towards Sabah. First, Sabah is only a transit or temporary safe passage among regional Islamist militancy to travel to the southern Philippines. Second hypothesis, Sabah become a target for profit-oriented and money incentive for crime terrorism groups. And third, Sabah has become a target for revival of fifth column movement, the rise of Zulu claimant movement and its security threat towards Sabah sovereignty. This, for us, this external regional crime terrorism group in Sabah can be divided into three types, as shown in the diagrams. First, regional militancy, including foreign terrorist group. Second, crime terrorism nexus. And fifth column movement that I will discuss later in this end of the presentations. Okay, I think I will, because of time constraint, I will skip these sections. Geography. The Zulu syllabus C is located at a trial border area that has been identified as one of the routes for regional maritime crimes such as piracy, smuggling of goods, drugs, or crime terrorism. Sabah is strategically located in the island of Borneo in East Malaysia, neighboring to Kalimantan, Indonesia, and southern Philippines, and also Brunei. The state extends from the South China Sea in the west region and Sulu Sea in the northern region of Kudat, and extend in the eastern coast covering the Sulu and Celebes Sea. Sabah also covers about 72,689 square kilometers of land and 54,360 square kilometers of sea territory, representing of 30% of Malaysian Economic Exclusive Zone. And additionally, Sabah has the largest maritime borders, consisting of approximately more than 70% maritime borders as compared to 30% of land borders. Okay, there are several points actually. There is several points of vulnerabilities that have always been exploited by this terrorist group. First, geographical proximity and social economic interdependence. As everybody knows, Sabah vastness of its maritime borders with long coastlines, with close proximity, with the existence of hundreds of red trails, many islands, the existence of many islands and inhabitants islands, these all become become the vulnerable points of Sabah itself. Therefore, even if there is also explained why it is very difficult for our security agency to man all of Sabah bordering with Philippines and also Indonesia. We also have an issue of barter trade, which is been practiced by the people in this region since time immemorial and continue until today because of the basic essential needs, everyday needs. And therefore, there is this also being exploited by this group. I mean, the radical extremist group to take advantage of these barter trade activities between this Sabah, Philippines, and also Indonesia. Sabah reliance on migrant workers. I mean, Sabah is over reliance on the migrant workers. There is also being used that also explain why many of the members of the Abu Sayyaf group, for example, had been arrested in Sabah. Because why? Because Sabah is too dependent on the foreign workers. Well, we don't like them, but we need them. Apart from that, we also have problem with ethno-cultural relation, kinship ties, and linguistic similarities between those people in the Philippines and also in Indonesia, and make it things complicated. From transit to potential safe haven. Apparently, Sabah has become transit. and potential safe haven for these activities. Yeah, most of the group, they're exploiting the kinship ties, the family ties, hiding their resources and information about the activities, and the availability of sea transportation make it easier for them. The existence of temple, kumpit, pambot, and many other types of sea transportation facilitate all of these cross-border activities. And an advantage for them because they are able to immerse with local Sabahan due to dialect and ethnic similarities. Money incentive rather than Islamic ideology. We also argue that, that this group actually they are more on money incentive rather than Islamic ideological driven. As you remember in Beaufort and Keningau, for example, sought to work in Sabah to earn living and fund the activities. Why do they work and come to Sabah? Because as I mentioned before, because of the poverty in Sulu, Apachalaga, and over-reliance of the migrant economic sectors towards migrant workers in Sabah. And they normally work in 3D sectors, in construction, plantation, and several other sectors, 3D means demeaning, dirty, and dangerous, Another element that always been exploited by this group because of the existence of water villages, water settlements, this settlement apparently has become transit point, temporary shelter, hideout, and shadow networking of clandestine channels, either groups or individuals to travel from Indonesia via Sabah to southern Philippines or vice versa. The water village and water settlement continue to expand and difficult to control because of the excessive number, and familiarity with the illegal settlers residing in this area, or make many locals are not aware that they are being exploited by this group. The group also conceal their identity for the temporary place to live, transit, advance their networking. And geographical destination. Recently, we can see that previously their activity, this group activity is only concentrated in the east coast of Sabah, but recently, since 2021, we can find that they are now moving to the western part of Sabah, western coast of Sabah. The success of the security agency to track ASG cells in Beaufort and Sipitang tell us about this, and also JID members in Keningau, Tenam, and Sipitang, all located in the east coast and the rural in the remote area. Assessment 1: Sabah as a transit temporary route to the southern Philippines. Regional militancy, Jemaah Ansharul Daulah. JID is a splinter of JI established by Aman Abdul Rahman in 2015. JI actively sent members to Iraq and Syria during the peak of Daesh. 40 JID members implicated as foreign terrorist fighters during the Marawi siege in 2017, in which most of them traveled to Marawi via Sabah as a backdoor. Route from Indonesia via Sabah to the Philippines, normally they will use Makassar, from Makassar to Tarakan, Nunukan in Kalimantan, and move to Sabah in Tawau in Sabah, Sarawak, Sabah, and from Tawau, this group will travel to Sandakan, Sempurna, and take a boat, either illegal or legal, to the southern Philippines. As I mentioned earlier, there are hundreds of red trails in Sabah, and difficult for the government, especially the security agency, to control, to patrol the movement. Why Sabah? Sabah is always considered as a safe passage, transit, and not a place for terrorist activities. As one of our respondents told us, Indonesia serves as a recruitment center, the Philippines as operational hubs, and Malaysia as a safe passage and to earn money. There is in line with our hypothesis that Sabah is not become a center for this. They only become a transit point for this group. JAD suspects have been arrested on the western coast of Sabah, Ningau, Tenam, and Sipitang. JAD behind the also behind the Holo suicide bombing and Makassar suicide bombing in 2021. The fact that those who are implicated with this escape to Sabah, among others Andi Baso and his wife Cici, and also Ruli and his wife Ulfa. Yeah, diri Andi Baso. Yeah. Assessment 2, Sabah as a target for profit and money incentive for crime terrorism group. Between 2000, the Abu Sayyaf, and in this case we use Abu Sayyaf and kidnapping for ransom. Yeah, between 2000 until 2021, there is 29 KFR incident took place in Sabah. Between 2000 until 2013, most of them perpetrated by the ASG leaders such as Galip Andang or Commander Robot, Rodulan Sahiron, Commander Putol, Isinolan Hapilon, Indaman, Hatip Sawajaan, and Hapsi Misaya. However, since 2014, after the establishment of RISCOM, majority of the KFR attack have been carried out by small group under the patronage of the Abu Sayyaf groups. Yeah? These include the Muqtadil Brother groups, Anjang Group, Gumba Hali groups, and also the Indanan groups. Although the ASG cell are declining its overall capacity, the KFR remain a high risk since their cells operate from lawless clandestine group based in Tawi-Tawi. The KFR is also hard to eliminate since tourism sector gradually returning to the normal situation. The risk of KFR should be anticipated since their motive is always money incentives. Strong counter-terrorism campaign in the southern Philippines and together with security cooperation with ESCOM in Sabah have led the explosion. Most of the members were exiled and fled, and some have surrendered to participate in the reintegration rehabilitation program in the Philippines. To date, there are more than 20 people linked to the Abu Sayyaf group on the list being sought for cross-border crime as well as KFR incident in S zone. Yeah, as of June 2022. Two ASG member, Yada and also Ben Tato from Indanan Group handed over themselves to the armed forces of the Philippines in Sulu. And there is a wanted list by Malaysian government. And finally, assessment number 3, the fifth columns. Yeah, Sabah as a target for the revival of the fifth column movement, the rise of Sulu claimant movement, and its security threat towards Sabah sovereignty. Here we use two groups to indicate how the revival of fifth columns, how the fifth column and the rise of Sulu claimant to indicate it has become a threat to Sabah sovereignty. First is Royal Sulu Forces and of Sulu Sultanate. This group responsible for the Tandua incident in Lahadato in 2013. Yeah, penetration among RSF materialized through kinship ties, family, and comes with confidence of the Sulu claim on Sabah. This group easily gaining grassroots support among Tausug community due to linguistic familiarities, maintain its organizational base in Sulu Archipelago. They also link with the Sulu Sultanate, Kiram family, claim on Sabah, and we argue that weak political will to deal with highly vulnerable people, especially the Tausug community, will be a challenge for the government in the southern Philippines and also in the Sabah to cater with these problems. Yeah, and another one is Sulu. There is a latest incident of Sulu Sultanate Darul Islam. There is a profit-oriented movement which had the ambition to take over Sabah and the Sulu Archipelago by claiming the Sulu Sultanate leadership. Their members are scattered in the Sulu Archipelago in east coast of Sabah. In A zone, members are required to pay fees for issuance of their birth certificate and identity card. As we know, in Sabah, this issue become one of the critical issues, yeah, for the Sabah government, because there are thousands, yeah, tens of thousands of stateless people living in Sabah. Stateless and Suluk Bajau community tend to be the mostly highly vulnerable group, as recruitment among grassroots followers came from this group. Lesson learned from Ops Benteng in Sabah during COVID-19 to 2020 and 2022. Yeah, several measures has been taken by the Malaysian security forces and Malaysian government to deal with the issue, including border securitization and also awareness of the preventive PCV process, yeah. Ops venting, for example, manage to reduce minimizing maritime crimes and other security threats. It is evidence when there is no incident of KFR incident throughout the pandemic since 2020 until today. Yeah, there is no incident of KFR. Social and welfare assistance together with the COVID-19 free vaccination for everyone regardless of their citizenship, also one of the success story to deal with the issues. Yep. Humanitarian assistance such as vaccination, TB, rubella, and etc. by civil society such as St. John Ambulance, and also increased maritime patrol throughout the maritime in a zone. Yeah? But the government also, we believe that we think that the government also need to intensify effort to win heart and minds through awareness. Yeah, and awareness among the PCV awareness among the locals to educate them about how kinship time may be exploited. Awareness of the threat of fifth column group from the southern Philippines. Grassroots engagement and support for water village population and water settlements. Vulnerable groups, stateless group, Palau, Gypsies, yeah, Suluk, Bajo community in Sabah. We need to emphasize on this, intensify more on win heart and mind of these these vulnerable groups. Yeah, and conclusion, strong counter-terrorism campaign in Sabah and southern Philippines by security forces had led to overall decline of ASG. Yeah. And make this group poor in terms of resources, scattered leadership, demoralized support for militancy, weakening of support among their members and former members, socio-economic incentive to assist surrender and demilitarized former militant in the southern Philippines have led to decline of ASG, but not necessarily the kidnapping for ransom group. We argue that external element of non-state actor, including the fifth column, is keep evolving. Therefore, security assessment must be observed from time to time. We also argue that changes in the southern Philippines as well as Kalimantan, the proposal to move to relocate Indonesian capital city to Kalimantan, must be observed diligently by our policymaker to adapt with the fast changing security situation in Sabah, as the threat is not always remain the same. And finally, the Sabah state government, together with the federal government, central government in Putrajaya, must take the lead to ensure and safeguard the security of the state by providing more support, especially financial resources, for the relevant security enforcement, particularly ESCOM, to safeguard Sabah security. With that, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. Ramli Dola from University Malaysia Sabah. We will now open up the floor for a Q&A session. So if any of you do have any questions, you may approach the microphone that's closest to you up front here. Please do indicate your name, the organization that you're from, and to which speaker you would like to ask the questions to. Similarly, also for those online, you may submit your questions through the chat box that you see on Zoom, and we will have those questions addressed to our speakers. Anyone from the floor over here in the ballroom? Any questions? Perhaps I'll pose one to Ms. Munira. Ms. Munira, you mentioned that PCVE efforts must be done holistically, as radicalization cannot be measured. In Malaysia, or in this region in particular, what do you think are the gaps that can be filled, or what are the areas that could be improved?
I think in Malaysia's experience is that I think we're placing too much emphasis on religious focus PCVE approach, and I don't think that's very productive in the long term, because this is not really a religious issue, but it's a bit more multi-layered and complex, and we should actually address it holistically, as in trying to improve relations across all communities, not just addressing it as a religious issue. So this is why I've been emphasizing that the whole PCV approach has to be reassessed, and the parameters for its success must be evaluated carefully, because we can't really say if it's successful or not, because too many people have been saying it's successful, but then we're getting data that says otherwise, because actually no one's actually doing a proper monitoring and evaluation on these PCVE campaigns. What I would suggest is that looking at Indonesia as a kind of a reference point, because the PCV approach, we can't really say that it's been that successful either, but there are plenty of lessons we could learn from their approach, in that they are making a bit more effort in providing their detainees, those who were arrested on terrorism-related charges. They're trying to run workshops and trying to teach them life skills, and to prepare them for their return to society. And I think this is a very important approach, because people are joining violent extremist groups for various reasons, and it doesn't necessarily have to be it's about religion. Sometimes it's also about money. And there's a lot of social factors we don't account for. So this is one of the approaches that we should look for, rather than just assuming that it's completely religious.
Thank you, Ms. Munira. Any questions from the floor? If not, I will also ask the questions to Major Noor Izani. Major, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Major, that you mentioned in your presentation that with the reopening of borders, it is expected that these terrorism or terrorist activities are expected to resume. Will we see a heightened level of terrorist activities as compared to pre-pandemic times, or is it the opposite?
I believe even during pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, the activities is still ongoing. So it might be as well will actively happening during this endemic as well. So it's for our Malaysian especially. In Malaysia, we are more, the threat is more to foreign terrorist fighters and extremists rather than the terrorism. Rather than the terrorists. So might as well the border, region and threats should be compromised by all government and all law enforcement to acknowledge the situation as well. So I believe all the activities business will be as usual, even whether it's pandemic or endemic.
All right, thank you, Major. We have a question from one of our online viewers. This is from Jasminda from RCIS, I believe that's how you say it, in Singapore. This is to Ms. Munira. Okay, his question is, would the rise of the Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia have an effect in Malaysia, as previously there have been many Malaysians who joined JI and even held leadership positions?
That would depend on how strong the alliance are in Malaysia, because to my knowledge, I don't think we've identified any known Jemaah Islamiyah agents here so far, but that might change. But again, right now, we need to consider Jemaah Islamiyah's focus right now, which is more focused on Indonesia's politics rather than region. So that's one aspect that might attribute to their focus and their necessities and their recruitment and tactics. Unless they've decided to go back to where they were before and creating all those manti-keys and making it regional, I think at the moment we could foresee that they're more focused on making it local.
All right, thank you, Ms. Munira. Any other questions online or from the floor here in the ballroom over here? Please don't be shy. Okay, I have one question for Dr. Ramli. You can hear me? Dr. Ramli, you mentioned that border security has been amplified. Although, we are seeing some changes in terrorism activities in southern Philippines, but just, to simply ask you, is Sabah safe today?
I think it is a very difficult question to answer. But for me, when people ask me, is Sabah safe, is Malaysia safe? Very simple for me. If you can sleep more than 8 hours a day, then you are actually safe. We are safe. Sometimes, if you look at the statistic, for example, from 2000, kidnapping forensic statistic from 2000 until 2021, for example, there is only 29 kidnapping incidents in this area. Actually, it is not a big issue. It's become a big issue because it is involved international systemic factors. For example, when U.S. government issue trouble warning and everything, it is shock for nations. But actually, it is not a very serious issue. And also, since 2000, if you look at what happened, especially in the Philippines since 2017, counter-terrorism effort the Philippines government has intensified the efforts to stop the groups, yeah. So that's also explain why the number of kidnapping incidents reduced in these regions. In the same time, ESCOM also play their roles. For example, ESCOM almost every 6 months they will issue a wanted list. It is a psychological war to the counterparts in the Philippines, meaning that you have to work against these people. Yeah, there is your problem and you have to deal with these people. I think there is a psychological activities, yeah. And in the same time, maybe one of the major constraints for the government, I think, especially for ESCOM, is about, again, it is in my conclusion, I mentioned about it. It is about resources, financials, yeah. Sabah coastline, Sabah geography, Sabah proximity, and many other factors. It is the first enemy of the security in Sabah. Yeah, even if we send all of our security agencies in Sabah, still cannot control that area. It has become a porous borders. Yeah, but again, Alhamdulillah, because for me, we are now safe. Everybody is safe, especially when with cooperation with our trilateral agreements with Indonesia and the Philippines and also Malaysia, we can. I believe the number will reduce in the future. Yeah. Number of kidnapping incidents will reduce in the future. That's it. Thank you very much, Nadia.
Sorry, can I add on?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, about Abu Sayyaf group in Sabah, if I may add on, I don't expect to see any increased terrorism activities with Abu Sayyaf group, but what we can expect is that there will be an increase in uptick in their piracy activities instead, because they have to function and monetize their activities in some ways. And we can expect that with the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, maritime security is going to be an utmost focus right now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Munira. Thank you, Dr. Ramli, and also Major Nur Izani. Once more, are there any more questions, perhaps online or from the floor? Okay, we have one.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Captain Dr. Teh Yap Leong. I'm from MiDAS. My question will be to Ms. Munira. Can you share with us what is the current status of Southern Thailand extremist activity in the area, and how things is happening in the area? Thank you.
So I can't really comment comprehensively because that's not actually my purview, but my understanding after reading a colleague's work on it is that there's no known jihadi organizations in Southern Southern Thailand right now. And again, the grievances are mostly local between the groups on the ground versus the central government.
Any more questions? Okay, yes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang bahagia Tan Sri, Datuk, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Zulkifli Renordin from Malaysian Armed Forces, currently serve at Air Operation Center in Subang. My question is there any data or studies related to the Malaysian current situation now, which is we have like a political situation, and then we have like extremism, and when mix it together, might be it can give some threat in the future, because we have, for example, the history had shown when we have problem with political and the race, we have like a May 13 riot, and then we have a Mamali incident, and then when the government had arrest Anwar Ibrahim, we have a riot in Kuala Lumpur. So it's like if there's no action taken or something like, because this can give a hotspot to the extremists to fuel something and to give a threat to the nation. Is there any data or study that have been made on that particulars?
Thank you for your question. I can actually answer that because actually that's my study. So that's a layered question. And again, this is a lot to do with the social media network right now. There's no known groups. Although you can say that there are some certain groups that are looking to stoke certain political agenda, but I will be very cautious about that. But to the whole racial tension, I think it depends on who's saying what and who's doing what. And a lot of this misbehavior is online. What's the goal? What we have to consider is what is the goal, what is the motivation, what is the purpose. More importantly, we need to emphasize what is the goal. So there are some clashing ideas, and we can't avoid that because this is social media, this is the internet. There are no rules on the internet. People are out there saying anything, just sometimes for fun, sometimes just because they're bored and they're jobless, for various reasons. But what is certain is that there are some malicious activities going on. They are trying to stoke tension. Because they are trying to drive the idea that this is what they believe and this is how they envision the country should look like versus the whole, multicultural approach. And this is something that has to be addressed. Again, as I mentioned, a policy solution that's driven to address it holistically. We cannot favor one group over the other. We have to address all the fractions that could risk fragmenting the society. And we need to take into account, be more accountable. But again, this requires a lot of commitment, not just from policymakers, but also social media companies themselves. And then also we need to align with the users to understand that what they're doing is also very unhealthy and harmful for society. So yeah, there are plenty of data and studies out there. And I think that we are trying to understand. I'm not very keen on using the word extremism because extremism suggests that it is a small group of people, but right now we're faced with a problem that's actually embraced by a large segment of population. If we say extremism, we're just thinking that it's just a small group, and again, the ideas, the ideology, they cross-pollinate, and then they get very, very malleable. Because they're packaged nicely, because they're supposed to echo your worldview. And this is largely the issue that we have to consider because social media acts as an echo chamber. And it is an algorithmic echo chamber. So sometimes we might feel very intense about it. We think, this is what people are saying, this must be true. But we need to also step back and realize that a lot of it is just what people say. We shouldn't let it cloud our judgment. So factor in policy-based solutions, try to address the whole community, try to avoid risking fragmenting society, and there you go.
We have a question from an online audience member. This is from Nizar from Unimas. This is a question for Dr. Ramli. Do you think that by continuing barter trade and transshipment in Sabah actually encourages more terrorist-like activities such as KFR?
We don't know. Actually, we did not argue. Okay, the point is that barter trade actually is a traditional barter trade activities between Indonesia, Philippines, and also Sabah. Why barter trade? We must understand first. Why barter trade? Because these people, especially those people living in the borders, yeah, they are far away from the Jakarta or Manila. Therefore, the price of food, especially necessity group, essential food, yeah, basic food, is very expensive. The easiest way for them to get a cheap price is from Sabah. The question back to whether barter trade will actually encourage more terrorists, like activities such as KFR. Here, the problem is not about the barter trade itself. It is about how barter trade activities become a point of vulnerabilities. This group normally they use boats, barter trade boats, yeah, compete, they normally call compete, to go to Sabah, to come to Sabah. That's the only point. Therefore, there is only not to say that continue the barter trade will encourage more. No. There is not the point. We only argue that we need to regularly monitor and regulate the barter trade activities. That's it. Because the point is that More problem will come if we stop butter trade. People in the southern Philippines, especially in the poverty-stricken area, in the Tawi-Tawi, will die. Therefore, there is also part of the Malaysian foreign policy, prosper thy neighbors, to memakmurkan jiran, to prosper our neighbors. In order for Malaysia to prosper, first thing that we have to do is to prosper our neighbors. So it's become a dilemma. We want to help these people so they not become a problem to Malaysia itself. So for me, the Malaysian government should continue with butter trade because there is part of humanitarians, human rights issue, especially to assist those people who live in the border areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramlee. We'll take one more question before wrapping up this first session.
Hello, my name is Nazaria Osman. I'm from University Utara, Malaysia. I have a question to Ms. Munira. I wonder, what is your comment on the success of our de-radicalization process? So how far can we guarantee that these people who have undergone this process, we can believe that, we can assure that they will not commit the same mistake or they will not commit themselves into terrorism activities? Thank you.
All right, so I'll be honest, people are not going to like my answer. I'm not sure if there's any successful de-radicalization, not just in Malaysia, but any country, because it's really difficult to quantify radicalization. No one has done it. So it really depends on their parameters set to establish if the person is de-radicalized or not. But then, again, there's always that tendency to return to crime, to return to terrorist-related activities. And then, again, you need to ask them, how did they decide? And I think one person I asked that before, they said that, oh, they give it about 2 years and then see if the person radicalized back or not. But so within the 2 years, the person didn't radicalize, but after the 2 years ended, he left for Syria. And I'm like, okay, so what are you going to say now? And he hung up the phone. So, all right, so yeah, it's really, I don't know if there's a right answer to whether a person is de-radicalized or not, because the whole theory of radicalization itself is flawed. But what you can do, what governments and authorities could do is that work towards, how to say, correct, I mean, like, we're thinking about more on rehabilitation and counseling. And some people are just so resistant to counseling that there's not much you can do about it. I think Singapore has this case where I think a couple of the detainees so resistant to rehabilitation and counseling that they are being detained for unknown time. But some people, if they are able to demonstrate that they are prepared to return to society without harming others, maybe we could give them benefit of the doubt. But that depends on the level of the crime or terrorism that they've committed, because of course we need to consider reparations as well and the victims affected by said individuals. But my issue with de-radicalization is that I'm not really convinced by claims of its success. But what we can do as policy is that we could try rehabilitation, counseling, and we need to look after communities and repair the community.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Munira. Thank you to our esteemed speakers. Thank you, Dr. Ramlee, Major Nur Izani, and Ms. Munira for the insights that you have given for this first session. I think there were many significant takeaways for our audience members, both present here in Intercontinental Hotel and also those joining online. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have a quick 5 minutes break before we proceed with the second session.